Mike Harris with What in the Law podcast, back to talk about something that comes up pretty often, and frankly, many of you may be guilty of. It's called harassment. In Colorado, there are different types of harassment. For today, I'm going to talk about physical harassment, which in the simplest form is, did you want to annoy someone and touch them? That's all it takes. Now, the full length of the law is a little bit longer. In harassment laws, as in most laws, the legislature puts in a lot of ors and different ways you could be guilty. The long version of physical harassment is with intent to harass, annoy, or alarm. Did you strike, shove, kick, touch, or otherwise subject a person to physical contact? So you take out some of those ors and you break it down, touching someone, and you wanted to annoy or alarm them. Tickling someone would make you guilty of the criminal offense of harassment, potentially subject to going to jail and other conditions of a conviction and probation. Now, to be fair, harassment is usually not charged in something that minor. It tends to be charged when there is something more serious, like an actual strike, like a punch or a kick or a more serious push. In fact, it is usually charged as a second or subsequent count when there is a more serious charge. But you can see how it can be such a close case in some situations as to, is this physical contact actually criminal or not? And this can be devastating in a couple different areas. One is, what if you're acting in self-defense? Well, there's a split amongst judges whether you can even claim self-defense unless you actually testify and confess that you touched somebody with the intent to harass, annoy, or alarm that person. Otherwise, you have to argue that you did not have that intent, even though you may have done something which may be to both protect yourself and could be seen as doing something to annoy or alarm someone at that same time. The other area where this can be really devastating is something like domestic violence. In Colorado, as in many other places, we have mandatory arrest laws that basically mean if there is any allegation that could substantiate a claim of domestic violence, the police have no discretion. They have to put you in handcuffs and take you to jail. Now, this was originally, these type of laws were made because sometimes police were not taking domestic violence seriously. There were many cases where women were basically being treated like property and that men were getting away with beating their wives or significant others. And we passed these laws to basically require an arrest. However, the laws don't give any discretion or have any level of what the evidence has to be or how serious it has to be other than probable cause, which basically means an allegation. So you might have a situation where you have a female who is much smaller who is accused of slapping or pushing a much larger, stronger male. In fact, I have cases like this all the time. And sometimes these get reported because something happens in public or someone loses their head and calls the police, not thinking about the long-term consequences. And in these situations, that woman gets arrested, taken to jail, and has to stay in jail until she sees a judge, which could be the next morning or the next Monday if you are unlucky enough to be arrested on a weekend Even worse if it's a holiday weekend. Now think about some situations where the woman might actually be the victim of domestic violence. This happens all the time. And one time the woman is right or wrongfully accused of striking back, but in the reality of the situation, she's the victim. And the man might have been abusing that woman. But if there is a report that she struck that man, that woman will be arrested and will be required to stay in jail regardless of the fact that this could be devastating. So these are not only an explanation of what some of our laws are, but how unfair the law can be, and how our politicians who get elected to the state legislature try to pass these laws to act all tough without thinking about the consequences. So if you, like me, are not happy with some of these laws and would like to see a little bit of discretion, hit up your local state representative or state senator or both and talk to them about why we have these laws with no discretion. And be very careful, and don't tickle your spouse if there's any risk of the police being called, because that would make you a criminal. So be careful, and see you next time on What in the Law podcast.